Hello, everybody. Alice Aycock is speaking with us tonight. Had you known Alice when she was a grad student at Hunter College, you would have known that she would take a path that was not quite ordinary. Her graduate thesis was on the New Jersey Turnpike. So obviously she wasn't going to be working on the pedestal in the future. In 1979, Rosalind Krauss wrote an essay, Sculpture in the Expanded Field. She was attempting to define a new type of sculptural practice that typified the generation of progressive artists at the time, Alice included. Krauss defined this new postmodernist work as existing in the expanded field between architecture and non-architecture, landscape and non-landscape. Alice's early work certainly exemplified that binary definition. What's happened in Alice's extraordinary career since, we're likely to see tonight. Alice Aycock.
Okay, so I think I see lots of people I know in the audience, and that's nice. And you know me, and I know you, so whatever. I'm just going to tell you some things I don't tell you in class. And I guess we can turn the lights off. Okay. So whenever I give this talk, I always start with a story. And the story is by Jorge Luis Borges. I read it a long time ago. It's called the Aleph. And I've made the story my own. So if you go and read it, it's going to be a little different than the way I tell it. But Bohr Hayes wrote the Aleph, and he wrote in the first person. And he's describing himself as a young artist, writer in Buenos Aires, and he is deeply in love with a woman named Beatrice, and she's a socialite, and she's everywhere in the newspapers and at parties, and she's very beautiful, and he loves her obsessively and passionately, and she is not that interested in him. She dies tragically, and he goes into a prolonged state of mourning, and he can't forget her. Every year on the anniversary of her death, he meets with her cousin, who I call Daniele. And he meets with the cousin, they have dinner, and he does it because he just wants to find out a little bit more about Beatrice. Any tiny thing he can find out, he wants to know. But Daniele is a poet and a writer, and he meets with Borges because he wants to talk about ideas and art and poetry and writing, and he's hoping to become well known. By that time, Borges is fairly famous in the literary world. So the two of them meet, and they have different agendas, but after about 15 years, Daniele says to Borges, I have this secret, and it's in my basement, and no one knows about it. I'm going to show you this secret, and it's extraordinary. It's marvelous. It's just amazing. And he tells Borges to go down the stairs and to lie down at the base of the basement stairs and to wait in the dark, and he will see this marvelous thing. So Borges thinks this is nutty, and but he does it. And he's lying there, and nothing's happening, and he's thinking he's crazy, and he's paranoid, and whatever. And then eventually he sees what he describes as a kind of tear in the universe. It's very small. It's 0.5 centimeter in diameter. And in that tear, he sees everything that was, everything that is, and everything that will be. And it's extraordinary. I mean, he can't believe his eyes. And when Borges tells the story, he goes on for pages and pages about what Borges sees down there. He sees Beatrice lying in her grave. He sees the disease in her body. He sees, a marketplace in Morocco. He sees to the farthest regions of the universe. He sees everything. And he just can't believe it. But it's there. So he gets up, he runs up the stairs, and he's just like stupefied. Daniele's so excited because he's finally shared this thing with somebody. And Borges just runs out the door, and he goes home because he doesn't know what to do. A couple weeks later, Daniele calls Bohr Hayes and he says, the restaurant next door is expanding and they want to tear down my house, and you're the only one that knows about this secret in the basement. You've got to go to the press. You've got to stand up for me. You've got to tell them so that they don't destroy my Aleph. And Bohr Hayes thinks about it, and he says to himself, you know what, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to help this guy. You know, he's kind of whatever. This is an amazing thing, and I'm just going to let it get destroyed. I'm not going to do anything. So he does nothing. The house is torn down. The Aleph is destroyed. And about a year later, Daniele publishes this amazing poem. It's just unbelievable, in which he reconstructs what was in that basement. And Bohr Hayes is no longer number one. He's wiped away, and Daniele's the new artist, writer, poet, number one. And at the end of the story, Bohr Hayes is ruminating. He's an old man. He's ruminating on this, and he thinks to himself, he says he knows where the real Aleph is. He knows where it is. He's going to find it. And he says, the years are wearing away the memory of Beatrice. Finally, this obsession has gone away. Well, I tell this story because there are many different ways in which I have bonded with that story, but basically it's Bohr Hayes thinking about Dante, and he's thinking about himself in relationship to his heroes and to the people who he wishes that he was as good as, the traditions that he wished that he could live up to, the people who have really made the tear in the universe. And he's sort of having a kind of fantasy about Dante. So I think about that because, of course, as an artist, most artists want to make that kind of tear in the universe, and they're very cognizant of who has gone before them and who has done that, who's made that kind of little quantum leap, made that little rip that wasn't there before. And also I think that a lot of art comes out of loss and love, and certainly, there it goes. Certainly, a lot of my art has come out of loss and love, both simultaneously and sometimes separately. And I've also, throughout my life, wanted to make that one image that's sort of a kind of generic image that contained its past and its present and its future. Not something that you could exactly put your finger on and say, that is that, but something that was broad enough, not abstract, but broad enough to sort of show its becoming, what it was, what it could be, and what it is at the present. And that's sort of been a goal. The final thing I'd like to say before I start showing you a bunch of images is that years ago, I was going back and forth to Europe, and I was going, a couple times a month. And I came home one night, and I was really on jet lag. And instead of going to bed, I went out dancing, which I love to do. I love then, and I still do. I went to the Roxy with a friend. And every time they were sort of playing music, and it would be the 50s, and then the 70s, and then the 60s, and then the 80s, and not the 40s, but they would just keep changing. And there would be no intermission between the different sort of songs of different eras, and so you would just have to immediately change the dance that you were doing to something else, and be there with it. Change. So it was lots of fun, and I went home, and I had this dream that I was dancing, but I wasn't dancing, the 30s or the 40s or the 70s or whatever. I was dancing throughout all of history. And one minute I was in Greece, and the next time I was in India, and then I would be, in the 80s, and then I would be in the Middle Ages, and then I would be in the Renaissance, and I would have to change in this sort of incredibly euphoric dream. I would have to change my dance step to match that period, and it felt like in my body, the whole way I was wired was switched each time, and I was sort of entering, like a time machine, these different kind of worldviews, these different compositional systems, these different rhythmic kind of patterns. And it was probably one of the most euphoric dreams I've ever had. And I thought, could I make art like that? Wouldn't that be great? Anyway, so those are kind of like aspirational stories. And I'm going to flip through a lot of images and go fairly fast. I'll tell you a little bit, but not a lot, and you'll just see a lot of images, and at the end you can ask them questions. This is a piece that I've just finished. Suzanne asked me to talk a little bit about how I use the computer. And I started using the computer in the early 90s. And I used it as a design tool and as a rendering tool. And for instance, and I have lots of help with this. I employ really super duper young architects who work with me to make these images. But we started right when AutoCAD and Rhino and 3D Max were beginning. And I kind of segued from drawing by hand in a sort of isometric orthogonal way, which is the way architects draw so that they can understand how to build things. That's how I started, and then I segued into the computer. So this is a rendering done on the computer of a piece that I just finished. And one of the former SVA students actually has built this for me. He's now got a shop in Los Angeles, and he does all my very difficult curvilinear pieces. We built this image in the studio, and we then broke it apart on the computer, analyzed it, and broke it down into how many different types of curves there were, made templates for him, analyzed all of the metal and how you would cut that metal and all the types of cuts that there would be. And this is the piece in his shop. And so I'm showing it because it's called Super Twister. And because it's hot off the press, and it's my favorite piece right now. Sometimes I do things and I don't like them as much as others, but this one is my fave. And so this is a small piece, and we're now going to build this about 20 feet tall in another shop in Brooklyn, and send it out to Cincinnati. Anyway, so this is an example of what you can do with the computer. Of course, there are many different stages, which I won't show you, but technology has made things that were very hard and expensive to do much easier than ever before, and also engineering these kinds of things. I have, throughout my career, been fascinated by certain images. One of those is the image of the vortex, a kind of whirlpool, turbine, maelstrom, and it occurs throughout my history. I was not necessarily conscious of that in the beginning. I had a conversation with a friend a couple days ago, and we talked about artists who kind of make the same thing throughout their life and artists who don't. And I've never made the same thing. I get distracted. I go off on garden paths. I can't keep, I just, I live a long life, and so something comes along and I'll go down on another path and another path. But there are certain images that keep coming back, and I make them in different ways, but in a sense they're the same obsession. And so this was all done on the computer as a proposal for a series of works that will go down Park Avenue in March of 2014. And so again, so you see where the site is, and this is the way we made a presentation to a committee in order to win either a competition or win the approval to do something. So you can see we bracketed from, I believe, 53rd to 57th Street, and then we made a series of renderings in which the committee would see what we were going to give them or build. Now, I do this kind of presentation a lot in order to get people to do what I want. So this is the first part of this presentation. There are a series of 6 sculptures. They're all about wind and turbulence, and I imagined something going up and down Park Avenue, a big wind, and creating the work or dropping the work or pushing it there. Each piece is a different sort of visualization or kind of the random debris piling of something. So I'll just go through this very quickly. This is going to be fiberglass and everything else, and it was made, I look at lots of different things to get my ideas, the high and the low. I might look at a site from some physics library one day and look at some fashion magazine the next. This was made from a dress, actually, and it's about 18 feet high. This will all be fiberglass. And so I'm just going to run through all the others are aluminum. And they're about this whirling, sort of twirling, random turbulence. I love hurricanes, I love tornadoes, I love chaos, as long as it's not happening to me. But I do think that this kind of whirlpool, which you can see when you flush your toilet, actually, is a sort of generating system for a lot of things that go on. So it's my kind of Aleph, so to speak, my sort of little obsessional image. And we both built this in the computer, and then we also photoshopped these pieces into the actual site, pretty much scaled to the way they're going to be. And this is just this little animation sequence, which I hope will do it on its own. So for those of you who are really computer savvy, you can see what you can do. And if you study at SVA, they have one of the best computer departments around. You should really take advantage of all of this technology. I am a true believer. It's sort of the difference between looking at the stars with your eyes, it's wonderful, it's marvelous, and then using a telescope. And that's the way I sort of see it. So what I did is I make all kinds of drawings all the time. Some of those drawings are to build things, and they're very technical, and some of those drawings are to show something and make something that you want to look at on the paper and that you might want to sell. And so this is a print that was made in order to raise money to build the piece. And what I did is I just squished the whole thing together. And when you're making drawings, you can do whatever you want. When you're actually building the sculpture, you have to obey certain rules. You have to stay within a budget. You have to engineer things so they don't fall down. You have to be pretty sure of what you want to do, because once you start spending the money, if you change your mind, you have people really upset with you. So you have certain parameters. But when you draw, you can do whatever you want. So I love to draw because I can do whatever I want. This is a piece I made in 1971. I think I was 25 at the time. And it's called Sand Fans, and it was done in a basement in Green Street with an artist co-op, a kind of thing, one of the first galleries in Soho. And what I did is I got about 4,000 pounds of sand. It doesn't look like a lot, and I put 4 industrial fans around it. I took the guards off the fans, and I set it there, and I just turned them on and let them blow any way they wanted. And what I wanted to do is to set up a certain kind of structure and then create an event. And once the sand all blew away, I swept it back up and started it all over again. This was a piece that I always thought was the beginning of my career, and it has these fans and this wind. And then years later, many years later, in 2008, I set it up again, and I did it in several places, including Dubai, and it ended up after, I don't know, from 71 to 2008, it ended up being collected by the Vuitton Foundation in Paris. So all of you are trying to sell your work. I just think it took me, how many years? Like 40 years to sell this piece. So you never know. Although most of the early work that I did, I sent home to my mother. And then that's how I dealt with things as I was moving rapidly through things. I'd try something out, I'd experiment, and then I'd go, bad experiment, send it to Mom. She kept a lot of it, too, unfortunately. So back in 85, 83, 84, I did a big piece called 1001 Nights in the Mansion of Bliss. And it has a big, it's about 80 feet long. It was done on Lafayette Street. I know the very building. It was a gallery space, very tall ceilings, 30 feet tall ceilings, 80 feet long space. And I did something which, again, you have a turbine, which is kind of like a Cuisinart, or a big turbine, something like a plow, like a knife, to me, again, it's one of those generic images. And then I made a lot of other elements around it. Some of them were the beginnings of the super duper looper. But this is sort of going from 71 to 83, where this image comes back of the spinning wind machines. And then this piece went all through Europe, and I sent it on a ship to Europe, and it went to 5 different venues, and it changed each time. I wanted something that had to do with a sort of a generic image that embodied technology, and I thought of it as a big blade machine, like a windmill, so to speak. Now, there are lots of different things that I look at for ideas. There's never anything that is too high or low. And one of the things I look at is war strategies. I love war strategies. They're beautiful drawings. And what's interesting about war strategies is they have nothing to do with, everybody sort of sets out this very controlled plan, and they put it on paper. And then the war starts, and all hell breaks loose. And so that kind of contradiction is really interesting to me. But I use it, and then I make pieces out of it. So this is, again, a computer proposal for a commission that I did not get. I think Frank Stella got it. I like his work, but I think that he doesn't do good, big architectural sculpture. He makes nice little wall pieces. But anyway. And another thing that you have to realize, I think everybody gets their feelings hurt. I said something in the studio the other day. We don't get our feelings hurt here. You have to develop a kind of skin that is so thick that you don't even know if you've got warm blood left anymore. Rejection, part of being an artist is being able to take an enormous amount of rejection and just keep on going and just let it just water off a duck's back, so to speak. So anyway, but I made drawings out of this, and this is one of my favorite drawings. And again, you see in the right hand this kind of tornado whirl. And what I was thinking of, it was for a basketball arena, and all this energy that was just blowing out of the arena. And I also used basketball strategies to make the proposal and the drawing. One of the things I love are amusement parks, because the machine it's like where the human being enters the machine. And amusement parks have to work, they have to be engineered really well, but at the same time, they're not really necessary. They're not every day. You thrill yourself for the fun of it. This is a ride that didn't work out so well, but I love the big curve and the curl. And this is a highway interchange. And these ramps, these curvilinear ramps, are another kind of image that I have used throughout my work. Gary said, he spoke about my master's thesis, which was on the highway. And highways, I thought of highways as giant labyrinths. So this is on the East River. It's going to get spruced up in a year or so. It's right by the Queensboro Bridge, and it's a kind of super duper looper, which mimics I always thought of it as something that kind of mimicked the energy of the city. I took it from a Fred Astaire dance diagram, which I should put up, but I forgot to put that reference up. At any rate, you can go see this piece and stand underneath it. A lot of times I will put a work in the world, and I will want it to operate as a kind of playing off something in the world, like this big arena and those big light stands, those big red light stands that you see. This piece is, I think, 120 feet tall. And again, I thought of it as a kind of dance, that two sort of truss bridge elements fell from the sky. That's the way I imagined it, is the story. And they landed there, and they were kind of in a stop motion. And there they are on this is Nashville, Tennessee, on the waterfront. There are lots of bridges in Nashville. Some of them are operational, some of them aren't. And what I think when I do some of these pieces in the world as opposed to the gallery is I want to work on an architectural scale. I have huge ambitions. I want to be, I want to be out there with all those architects in the world, but I also want to play off the world. And I always have finite budgets that I have to, otherwise I would lose my shirt. But I don't necessarily always want you to know immediately that it's a work of art. I want you to kind of look at it, then look at the world, and then look back at the piece, and begin to see the world as a kind of work of art, perhaps, the bridges, all of that. This is a diagram of hummingbirds and their courtship system, and I thought, what a beautiful diagram. What happens if I make a work of art out of that diagram? What if I use that as a truss system? And so this was a drawing made on the computer as an art drawing. This piece is approximately 400 feet long, I think. It's not a very good picture, but it's in Baltimore in front of an IRS building. And it kind of looks like the alien landed, I think, if you went there and saw it, and it just sort of this truss is kind of taking over this very boring sort of 60s building. This piece was made by an amusement park company, and I will go to all kinds of places to make things. I won't necessarily I'll use small fabricators, but I won't necessarily use quote-unquote art fabricators. I'll use people who do something for a living and who just look at it as a job, because that's always worked out a lot better for me. Well, I love the sort of Starry Night, the thing that used to be published in the New York Times where you could find the stars from month to month. And I love that very simple little circular system. And in the case of these series of drawings, which I did recently, the piece I showed you was taken from the courtship patterns of hummingbirds. And I like birds. I like birds because they can do what we can't do. And I think we always want to be able to fly like you do in your dreams. You just lift your arms up and you're flying. It's just something I've always wanted to do. I just want to lift my arms up and fly. I used to have flying dreams. I don't have that so much anymore. So I saw on the internet these patterns, these flocking patterns of starlings. And starlings over Rome will move in the most amazing ways as a group. And when they change direction, they seem to know which way to go, almost like it's like they just know. And like they're moving at the speed of light in terms of how to know who's the leader. No one knows. So scientists are studying flocking patterns, and they're trying to figure out why fish can do it and birds can do it. And I thought, well, I'm going to take these flocking patterns, and then I'm going to impose, they look like beautiful drawings, and I'm going to impose all these blade machines on them and make these drawings, just for the fun of it. So all of these, instead of birds, are little turbines and little blades taken from airplanes and motorboats and turbines and all that kind of thing. And I did a series of 9 drawings. But again, I worked on the computer. And what I did is I figured out what I wanted to do first on the computer and then use that as a pattern to make the drawings. Everything that I do when I make a drawing is figured out ahead of time for the most part. I never work kind of just where I'm sort of instinctually drawing. Everything is very planned out, sort of like an architect would do. I love sort of these big sinkholes, and I think this is a drawing made out of an Edgar Allan Poe story. You just get into this vortex abyss in the middle of the ocean, and you're just pulled down and down and down, and you don't know where the bottom is, and it could be a black hole, and you're falling, and you never know where the bottom is. And I'm scared of that. That really terrifies me. But I love making art about that feeling. So this is a very early piece made in the 70s. It's concrete. and you get up to it and you look down, and it has this kind of, it pulls you down. And it has these ledges that you have to kind of climb around until you get to the bottom. It's very small piece. A lot of the pieces I made were only seen as photographs. They were made out on a farm in Pennsylvania, and then they were photographed and documented that way. These are a series of 10-foot spinning whirlpools, and so they're about, that whole thing is about 25 feet in diameter. And they spin and they throw themselves up in the air, where they will spin, they'll put themselves up like one of those amusement park devices where that plate whirls around, and that's what these things do. If you get between them, it's not a good idea. And so when I exhibited it, you couldn't walk into the room. It was like walking into a jet engine. And I like sometimes to make work that has that kind of power to it, that is like life in that way. So all of these sort of whirling sort of forms, bowl-like forms, step-like forms go out throughout my work at different periods of time. This is pieces now at Storm King. It's about 32 feet tall. And again, it's almost like satellite dishes stacked one on top of the other with these sort of steps inserted. And I like satellite dishes. I love looking on top of buildings, and when I see these satellite dishes, I'll just stare and stare. And sometimes the world becomes a work of art for me. Sometimes stuff out in the world is better than a museum for me. So, and it doesn't bother me, it's just the way it is. I love the Jersey Turnpike. I love all that industrial debris. And so this is a piece. This shows it being photoshopped. Some of the sites I got, or still get, are very banal. And like, this is outside of St. Louis. It's a community center and a high school. And I thought, I don't know if anyone's ever read, I think it's Ray Bradbury, Something Wicked This Way Comes. It's about a little town in the Midwest, and a circus comes to town, or amusement park thing, and it stays, and then it whirls people up in the community and takes them away, and they're never seen again. So I was thinking, here's this place out in the middle of America, and I'm going to set this thing there. And, you know, and it looks like it's waiting for the aliens. And it's very bizarre in this situation. And I think that America needs the aliens really badly. So a lot of these pieces are really like sitting there waiting for the aliens to like say something, beam something into that receptacle. They're not really just for the people there. This is another one. It's in the airport in Kansas City. And again, it's one of these kind of vortex sort of pieces. Again, it's waiting. Planes fly over it. And it's a long-term parking facility. Now, you can say to yourself, how could somebody put a piece of art in a long-term parking facility at an airport? And what I was thinking is that here's another piece kind of waiting for the aliens, but somebody comes along, they're really tired, they park their car, they come back to Kansas City, they get off the bus, they're going to their car, and here's that thing just sort of sitting there. And so they have an experience. And I get to do a piece. And in a certain way, whatever allows me to do the next piece, I'll go for. It's like a kind of addiction. I can't help it. Just can't help it. This is Leonardo Da Vinci, part of his Deluge series. And Leonardo is a hero of mine. He would be what Dante was to Bohr Hayes, Leonardo is to me. And the Deluge series, in which he's trying to understand wind and water, has fascinated me. Back in the 80s, I made a whole series called The Leonardo Swirl. And now I'm doing all these turbine turbulence pieces about hurricanes and tornadoes. But this is a little Leonardo Swirl. It looks very sweet and decorative, and I kind of went, ugh, it's so sweet and decorative. People liked this piece, and I kept going, oh, they like it. Ugh, I must have done something wrong. And these are hurricanes, because sometimes when your audience likes something so easily, you have to question yourself a little bit. Was that too easy? You know, and I come from a generation of people who don't necessarily want everyone to understand their work. They only want a few people to understand. They want people who know something about art to understand it, not just the general population. So I look at hurricanes. We all look at hurricanes all the time now because hurricanes are part of our life. And I look at these things and I just think, what an incredible composition. Which isn't to say that I'm not scared of hurricanes, that it doesn't bother me when it destroys people's lives. But at the same time, I can kind of separate and look at them as a phenomena and think, you know, this kind of awesome terror is really interesting as a kind of idea to play with. So I did a bunch of drawings. I love game boards, and I did a bunch of drawings with these whirling, tornadic pieces on them. And again, I was just having fun, like in my own little world where I don't have to talk to engineers, I don't have to talk to committees, I don't have to talk to fabricators, I can just do what I want in my own space. And here's some other, I look at these things as drawings and as sources of ideas. This is a piece that is permanent. It's in the San Francisco Library. It's a kind of stairs vortex, which is attached to the library. And I worked very closely with the architect of the library, who was a partner at IM Pei at the time. And this is done on the computer. So there's just a series of works that all deal with these whirling, superimposed, curvilinear forms. I love aerial views, plan views of theaters. And I will look at anything if it strikes my fancy and then try to make something out of it. I try not to be judgmental about what I like. If something catches my attention, I'll save it. I'll save it on the computer, or I'll cut it out of a magazine, or I'll scan it. And so I have a whole bunch, a library of images. And when I need an idea, I'll scan through those images. This was definitely built with the aid of the computer, as this one was. Both of them are in Florida. And again, you can see this kind of ribbony, whirly thing that keeps running through my work. I'm showing you work that was done from 2000 to 2013. Much more recent work. Here's I saw this, I thought, what would happen if I was able to take all of those curves in her dress and make a work of art out of it? You know, what would that look like? And so I started playing with acrylic. And acrylic is very flexible, and you can heat it, and we heated it on a mold, and we made these curves. And so there's about 30 feet of acrylic ribbon, and then I laced neon through it, and it's a public commission in New Jersey. Again, in a rather banal, it's just at a school in New Jersey outside an auditorium. Another source. These are water that's, I like explosions. I don't want to be an explosion. I have a fear of explosions. I don't like the fact that people get hurt by explosions, but this is done in a laboratory because they're trying to understand the physics and the impact of the water hitting itself. And so I look at things like that. Now, the Wavianiper, which was built in 2011, 2010, I can't remember, I went to a 3D math site on the computer, and it had all these incredible forms that were developed from mathematical equations. And what happened is they wanted to visualize what these forms would be like from the equations. And the one that caught my attention was the Wavianiper. Sounds like a horrible name, but I looked at that Wavianiper and I said, it looks like it could be an umbrella. It looks like it could be a butterfly. It looks like it could be a shiitake mushroom. It looks like it could be a jellyfish. It looks like it could be a dome. It looks like all kinds of things, but it's just a mathematical form. I'm going to build it. So we took that form off the internet. We drew it. We sent it to the fabricator. He took that computer drawing off the internet. He cut out of, using that drawing, he cut styrofoam forms, and then he sent it to a guy out in Long Island who built this piece exactly as, and I actually never put my hands on it until I went out and saw it in fabrication. And this is about 7 feet in diameter. It can scale up. It could scale up to be 30 feet in diameter. It could be an architectural element, actually. These are more forms built for a commission in Michigan using the same process and torquing. You can torque these shapes and you make them you draw them in the computer, you send them to the guy who makes the styrofoam molds, and he uses that computer drawing to drive his machines to cut that styrofoam, and then that goes to the fiberglass guy. And then you get all these shapes. Something like this would have been really difficult to do 20 years ago. It would have been really impossible to do, and it would have been so expensive. And now it's easy. Another source, a computer rendering of a piece that I proposed to some people down in DC for Dulles Airport, the international arrivals area, and I made that proposal, and then I showed them what this would look like in their space. Of course, we made this space very idealistic. It didn't have all the crap that the space has. And that's part of the problem, I would say, with the computer renderings, because you can make everything so perfect, and sometimes the site isn't as perfect. They've got all that crap going on, which gets in the way of my piece, and that, And you have to suspend it, you have to engineer it, you have to use all those cables, and, so there's a kind of idealized world in the computer, and sometimes the world itself, the real world, doesn't live up to it. I sometimes have a fantasy of thinking up the idea, drawing it in the computer, presenting it in a space, publishing it, never building the thing at all. Who would know? Who would know? At any rate, because how many people really see these things? But that's cheating. We know it's cheating. And there is a big difference between standing there, experiencing the piece, and seeing it as a computer rendering, and or seeing it even as a photograph. So this is one of my favorite. It's one of my roller coaster images that I love. It's all intertwined and, complex, and this was done long before the computer, of course. And this is a drawing that I made. So I did a series of drawings in which I thought about my life, okay? So you start in one place and you end up in another. And at different times in your life, there are these intersections. And so you could have gone this way or you could have gone that way. Something happened that changed things. There's all this kind of random thing. It isn't exactly like you go straight from the beginning to the end, and that goal is just so clear. And then I thought of this sort of equation in physics. Feynman talks about how there are a multitude of ways that a particle can get from A to B, in many, many paths, and you can go backwards and forwards in time. So then I took drawings. I found this image of cars in a parking lot that I had had for years and years and years. We took that image and we began to extrude it and treat these lines like they were pathways and ramps. And then I did a whole series of drawings in which I made it's called, what is it called? Timescape. And it's about a life, maybe my life, maybe somebody else's life, and all the ways that you sort of get from one place to the next. And then I superimposed those on different types of maps. And so the first one is map of the Pacific Ocean without all the water in it. And the second one is a bombed field. And of course, there we are, wars. I love wars, and I love craters and bombed things. Don't ask me why. I just, I'm not a terrorist. I'm not an anarchist. And then I took those lines and those drawings, and I made that into a big architectural sculpture, which I proposed to the city of Toronto. They didn't want it. They said no. And so we're getting to the end of the talk, and I'm going to tell you another short story, and then I'm going to get really quickly to the end. Years ago, 2007, I had wanted to go to India all my life, and I thought, and there was a series of precincts and buildings in Delhi that I had looked at in books and in images forever and ever and ever. And it was in Delhi, they were observatories in Delhi and Jaipur. And I thought, it's getting to the point where I better go now. I better go now. It was 2007, 2008. The stock market was crashing, and life was looking like not so hot. and banking system was collapsing. Everything was collapsing. And I thought, I better go now. And so I went to India, and I got that, the tour where you went here, there, everywhere as fast as you could possibly go. I got to Jaipur. Jaipur is a beautiful, beautiful city. It's all pink, and it's crumbling, and it's like the rose-red city, half as old as time, but it's Jaipur. And it's frenzied, and it's dirty, and it's beautiful. It's extraordinary. And there is a gate there, which is just amazing. It's all pink, and it dates, I think, from the 18th century. And I'd waited all my life to see it. And it's a gate that all the women in the harem stood behind, and they were able to look out onto the street. They couldn't be in the street, but they could look out at the street. So the tour guide stopped his car there, and I said, let me out. I want to see this gate. Just give me 5 minutes to look at this. I've waited all my life to see it. I don't want to go to your souvenir shop. Just let me here, just for 5 minutes. So I was standing there on the street, and I felt this tug on my coat. And I thought, it's just another beggar, whatever. I want to just look at this beautiful, beautiful building. And she kept tugging and tugging. And finally I turned and I looked at her. And she had a scar that went from her throat to her crotch. Someone had cut her, and badly. And she was showing me that scar because that's all she had in the world to beg with. And I was standing and I was looking at one of the most beautiful pieces of architecture in the world, and I was looking at something that was so tragic and so unbelievable that I just didn't know what to do. So I went home and I thought about it, and I'm sure she's dead and there's nothing I can do for her, but I made this drawing for her. And I think it's like 8 feet long or something, and it's that gate done over and over and over and over, and at the center is a big turbine, and in back are all these ribbons of material. She'll never know, and she'll disappear like I'll disappear, we'll all disappear. But I think sometimes you make art to just put something out there when you have to you just have to do it. You just have to do it. And that's about making art about death or life or love or all those things. And it's my favorite drawing, actually, for now. So when I was back in the 90s, I think, I decided I would take the Starry Night and I would make a series of drawings because I thought people look up at the sky throughout all the centuries and they try to imagine what the universe is like. And so they make their worldview by looking up at the stars. So I did a series of drawings, it's called the Starry Night series, in which I took diagrams of cities, diagrams of dances, I think that's wars and the other was cities, diagrams of languages, diagrams of games, diagrams of worldviews, and played a game of connect the dots with the stars. And I had read somewhere where maybe the universe is really just a child playing a game of marbles with the stars. Maybe that's all it is. So I thought, I'll play my game of marbles, my kind of narcissistic, crazy game, as though I could have everything within these circles. Okay, and finally, the last piece I'm going to show you is one of my favorite pieces, and I did it in 1975, and it's not curved, and it's not about vortexes, it's not about any of those things. It's about a kind of very clear order on the surface of the Earth. It's laid out like a minimal piece. It's very geometric, and you see these shafts on the top of the surface of the Earth. I built it in 75, and I got to rebuild it in 2011 permanently. And then you come upon it, it's in a field out in a sculpture park in New York State. You come upon it, and you go down those ladders, and you're encased in concrete, and you go from dark to light to dark to light, crawling around, and you go underground. You experience something on the top of the Earth that's very rational and that's very clear, and then you go underneath the ground, and you go into darkness, and you have to kind of find your way, and you have to experience maybe a small little state of fear or anxiety or something else, something more mysterious. And so I like to make art like that. And that is the end of the talk. Thank you.